Welcome to Through the Eyes of She, Equity in Health, Education, Business, and Leadership for the African Woman in the 21st Century. Please utilize the chat and Q&A features on the side of your toolbar. Please use the Q&A feature to submit any questions for the panelists. This session is being recorded. Thank you.
Welcome back from the break. I'm Asghar, Emeritus Professor of Medicine and Founding Director of the Office of Global Health in the Department of Medicine at Yale. My task is to tell you briefly about the history of Makerere University, Yale University, so-called MUYU project, now in its 15th year, and then introduce the panel. The MUYU model was based on a philosophy that for any collaboration to have a long-term, meaningful, and sustainable impact, it must focus on identifying local talents and providing them with outstanding training. I came to believe in this philosophy during the decade I spent in Iran as a faculty member in Shiraz Medical School, developing and leading several collaborative projects with institutions in North America and Europe. When I came to Yale in 1985, I was very interested to see if the collaborative model developed in Shiraz could be transported successfully to other sites. The opportunity came in 1994 when I was joined by a wonderful colleague at Yale, Dr. Majid Sadiq, a product of the Shiraz experiment, to develop mutually beneficial project with Kazan State Medical University, one of the premier medical schools in Russia, focusing on building human capacity for health. This ongoing collaboration, housed at Yale for the first 18 years, trained more than 30 faculty and consultants for the school in Russia, profoundly changing the structure of medical education and quality of training program in both undergraduate and postgraduate level. Then Dr. Sadiq, an HIV doctor who had become a member of an academic alliance in Uganda to train healthcare workers in the care of patients with HIV disease in sub-Saharan Africa, invited me to join him in Kampala. I jumped at the opportunity to explore the possibility of creating a program with Makerere College of Health Sciences. Although Makerere College of Sciences had many fruitful collaboration with first-rate institutions in global north, the MUYU project developed jointly with leadership at Makerere was the first that had the specific mission to improve patient care through education and training. The core foundation of MUYU is based on mutual respect, unified vision, and a deep passion for social justice. We, from the beginning, entered this collaboration with deep humility, introspection, and commitment to equity. Makerere leadership was interested in improving its human capacity for health in specific areas, and Yale was interested in having a meaningful relationship with a first-rate institution that could provide high-quality opportunities in global health to students, residents, and faculty at Yale. One measure of the success of the program is the fact that now 3 schools, School of Medicine, Public Health, and Nursing, and multiple clinical departments at Yale have collaborative projects with colleagues at Makerere. This project has also become a foundation for our 7-year involvement in Rwanda project and the 6th year in Liberia. You'll hear more about it later. Let me introduce the panel very briefly. A more detailed bio is available on the website. Professor Harriet Mienja-Kiza is an internist and researcher at Makerere. She was chair of internal medicine for 8 years, a dean of the medical school for 5 years, and currently serves as a co-director of MUYU. She has conducted research in the area of tuberculosis and HIV with emphasis in immunopathogenesis, epidemiology, and has used clinical trials. She's currently a site director for multiple international studies. She's an outstanding clinician and educator who has guided MUYU with unbound energy and wisdom. Dr. Damiela Nakanjoko is Professor of Medicine and Principal of Health Sciences, immediate past Dean of the School of Medicine at Makerere. She's a Scientific Director of Translational Laboratory at Makerere University Infectious Disease Institute, where she leads a translational immunology research focusing on chronic inflammation and its complication among HIV-infected adults. She's co-director of Makerere University, Uganda Virus Research Institute Infection and Immunity Program. She is winner of the 4th annual Mayor S. Sandy Health Leadership Award in 2013 in recognition of her contribution toward leadership and healthcare in Africa. Professor Pauline Biatika Kipwika is an internal medicine specialist and epidemiologist. She's chair of the Department of Internal Medicine at Makerere. She has long interest in research ethics and is director of Research Directorate and head of Scientific Review Committee at the Department of Medicine. She's a fellow of Uganda National Academy of Science and director of the Women's Science Korea Development Program. Dr. Annette Dokimuri is Associate Professor of OBGYN and Dean of the School of Medicine at Makerere University. She is previous chair of the Department of OBGYN. Her research interest is preeclampsia, a major cause of maternal mortality and morbidity in sub-Saharan Africa. She served on several national international committees and received multiple prestigious awards, to just name 2: Future Leaders, given by Royal Society and African Academy of Sciences, and Grand Challenge Africa awardee, given by African Academy of Science in 2021. She currently serves as president of the East Central and South Africa College of OBGYN. Dr. Tracy Rabin is Associate Professor of Medicine and Director of Office of Global Health in the Department of Medicine at Yale School of Medicine. She's also Associate Program Director for Global and Community Health in Yale Primary Care Program. Since 2011, she has served as the Yale Co-Director of MUYU, a bidirectional medical educational capacity building program. Her current focus is on global health, workforce education, and ethical challenges related to short-term clinical work in resource-limited region. Let me give the podium to my wonderful colleague, Dr. Tracy Rabin. Tracy?
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Dr. Rastegar. And thank you to the organizers of today's conference for the privilege of our panel being here today. As Dr. Rastegar said, I'm the Yale-based co-director of MUYU, and I am thrilled to have the opportunity to moderate a conversation today focused on addressing gender equity in health education leadership in Uganda, and to have these 4 accomplished leaders and role models here to share this panel with me. As Dr. Rastegar had noted, the core mission of the MUYU collaboration is to improve patient care through education and training. From the outset, Professor Mayanja Kiza and other members of the leadership at Makerere had identified the need to provide formal faculty training in a variety of medical specialties. So focusing on junior faculty who had had some experience working in their chosen fields and thus had both specific training goals as well as roles and responsibilities to return home to, either on the faculty or in a Ministry of Health position. MUYU has brought 30 faculty to Yale for training over the past 15 years, 27 in person, and then 3 are now engaged in hybrid training due to COVID-19. These individuals were identified by the team at Makerere as emerging leaders working in fields in need of development. And of those trainees, all of them continue to work and teach in Uganda, with the vast majority continuing to work at Makerere University or at one of the affiliated teaching hospitals. Although there was no specific requirement to consider gender in the selection of these individuals, it's important to note that 33% of these faculty are women. And putting this in context, as was noted in a 2015 article that Professor Nakanjako first authored and Professor Nakamuli and Mayanja Kiza both contributed to as well. In 2015, 30% of faculty at the Makerere University College of Health Sciences are women. And then with respect to the academic pipeline, MUU has also engaged in bringing senior medical students to Yale for clinical rotations, majority in person, and then also now virtual because of COVID. And half of the 45 students who have engaged in this program over the same period of time have been women. So with this as background, I'd like to start our conversation with some questions that I have for our panelists. And I'd also like to remind the audience that we have about 10 minutes at the end allocated for Q&A. So please do write your questions in the chat. We'll do our best to address them then. And then additionally, Professor Mayanja Kiza and I will be joining other colleagues during a lunchtime session focused on women-led partnerships in academic global health. So some questions may be suited for that venue as well. So I'm going to ask my first question to Professor Mayanja Kiza. So Professor Mayanja, you completed your clinical training during a time that was both politically challenging for Uganda and also very different in terms of the proportion of existing female physician role models. So can you briefly describe your career path, put it in that context, talk about how gender affected your career path, and then some of the roles that you have played in helping to expand the pipeline for women physicians at Makerere University and in Uganda in general.
Thank you, Tracy. It's a loaded question, but I'll see how I handle it. Yes, we qualified in medicine during times of political turmoil. Interestingly, those are not the major challenges in my life. All of us were in the same boat, and we had to handle this, and we succeeded by God's grace. However, there were other challenges, especially in medical school. When I joined medical school, I think there were 11 women in a class of about 110, 120. So about 10% of us were women. And we got challenges from our colleagues. And I remember some incidents. I remember one incident where a colleague said, you girls in medical school should all be nurses, but in a doctor's uniform, because they felt that we should not have been doctors, we should have been nurses. Then there were other minor issues, like a male student comes and says, this is my seat in the lecture room, I always sit here. But I say I came first. So we had such little fights. And when some of us were determined to win the fights, if I came first, the seat is mine, whether you're a man or not. I think some of us had the background played a role. I was born in a family of 7 girls and 2 boys. The girls in our family were bossy. The boys were quiet and laid back. And the girls, we had our fights and each one wanted to win the fight. So I think from the background, we learned we had to succeed irrespective of what happens. So I think in medical school, there were issues, but we managed to overcome them because many of the girls we're with find ways of handling issues. We formed a group of 4 girls in medical school. We'd sit in the evening and revise together because the men kept saying, you girls can't make it, your brains can't do this, and so on. And these were comments which we ignored and moved on. And then fast forward, when I joined the residency or master's program, I completed it with a number of males. In the end, one of my lecturers said, Harriet, you're the first female physician in Uganda. I hadn't thought about that. And when I looked back, I wasn't the first female to join residency program in Uganda, but as the first to pass after the 3-year program. I remember 2 of my former colleagues, one failed an exam every year, not because she was not bright, but because she had a family and children. And the other one just gave up because she realized it won't work. She was in the wrong place. In my first and second year of residency, I was the best in my class. I remember a time when Professor Person from Virginia was a lecturer and said, oh, I'll give you a bottle of wine because of the diagnosis you made during the exam. In the 3rd year, I didn't pass. Clinical exams were 2. One, I got 48%, one I got 52%, pass mark was 50. In the examiner's meeting that ensued, I was told there was a long discussion over 1 hour, where the examiners were discussing whether Harriet should pass or whether she's ready to be a physician or not. In the end, the seniors felt that I was not yet ready to be a physician and I can't have a mark of 50 taken to faculty board. So my mark was brought down to 48 and I was to repeat for 6 months. After 6 months, the same debate came back. But here are some physicians who thought it was being unfair. I think one that did, and they agreed that Harriet can pass. That impacted on my life when I became a leader, when I became a head of department. As head of department, we're used to the marking scheme for clinicals. The range was 48 to 55. 55 if you're very bright. 52, 50 was the average. First thing I did, I said, we're going to change this. Let's give marks in clinical exams fairly. If you're excellent, 80. If you're a bit good, 70, and so on. My seniors then, our very senior colleagues said, oh, these are Mayanja marks. She gives a lot of marks to people, but I said we have to be fair. Another incident I remember is when a pediatric resident was clerking in internal medicine and she failed the clinical exam. She came and said, do you know, I was not the head of department then, do you know that person who examined me, a male, had issues. It seems there were issues of sexual harassment. And I knew with that I could not pass. So Professor Frias, who was the chair, then got other examiners for this woman. They examined her and she passed. And again, that impacted on me. And I realized that in clinical exams, you can't have one examiner, you have to be two because of this unfairness. And then fast forward, what are the challenges? Women, we have social challenges, okay? Women, do you spend your time behind a computer or behind a cooking pan? Sometimes the family expects if there's a mother and so they seem to be spending too much time in books rather than spending time after your family. Then there are examples, there are the family challenges, like the nuclear family. Had one student who had a problem because she thought her child was sick with AIDS in those days, but HIV negative. So I told her, bring the baby to the office, baby was 6 months. Baby had a rash and had diarrhea and was unwell. And we found that the baby's problem was nappy rash. And the diarrhea was, the helper was not clean enough. So that helper, the young woman was almost dropping out because of challenges with children. What's challenges our spouses, and I've had to deal with a number of those. Where students come and say, my husband says I'm doing a master's, he doesn't have a master's, he's competing with me. My husband says I'm doing a PhD, and I mean, he's feeling challenged because he has a master's and he tried to do a PhD and he didn't quite make it because he was busy with his work. And then others where the husband says, I don't respect him enough in my home, I don't kneel in front of him, and so on. So I've had people in the various departments who have come to me to talk to them and so on. Then there are work challenges. In academia, there's a lot of travel. There are some who just could not travel. Their spouses said, if you travel, how do I know how you behave when you go out there? So some, it was hard for them to travel because the spouses did not trust them enough. So when I realized that, I started thinking that I have to mentor the various women, especially the ones in residence and so on. And I used to do this on a one-to-one basis. I remember one student, a resident, was a bit depressed. I called her to my office and said, what's your problem? He said, I'm the only woman in the group, and the men kind of do their own thing. They leave me behind, and so they don't discuss things with me. I came from another university, and this place is new to me. I don't know where to go. I don't know where their pathology room is, and so on. And I'm the only one from a certain part of the country. And because of that, I feel I'm in the wrong place. I mentored that young woman till she graduated, and now I'm proud of her because she's a leader where she is. She's an executive director of a hospital in Uganda, and she has done a great job. And there were other various challenges. So I used to call women one by one and talk to them. I'll talk to them about how are you getting on, children. Some are challenged because they say, I'm not yet married and I'm studying, I'm now between 25 and 30, and family says I should get married. Others say, I don't have a child, and you tell me I must have a child. Others, so there are a lot of issues. And by the nearly all of them, I talked to hard issues, varied. So I started talking to them one by one. I'd call them to my office, meet them under the mango tree. I would talk, hello, how are you? How are you getting on? I would listen to them. And what I used to tell them was always the same. You can buy books and babies, do both. If the husband wants you to respect him, leave books in the office at 7 p.m., go home and have quality time with your spouse. If the nuclear family thinks you should spend more time, or the extended family, do that. As a doctor, my father had a stroke, and as I was supposed to look after him, both financially, medically, visiting, and so on. My mother had Alzheimer's and Parkinsonism, I was the one who was supposed to look after her. Finally, I got a very good nurse who helped me with that. Other family members thought, you're the doctor, you have to do this, and you're a woman, you have to do this. So I think it's important for us women to look out for each other. And I've tried to teach the women and mentor them so that they look out for the next ones. When they reach a certain level, I said, hey, you're now at this level. Whom are you mentoring? I think I'll stop there, but in conclusion, I've enjoyed what I've done. I've enjoyed the people who have succeeded after me, especially the young women, and I've enjoyed watching them grow, and I've enjoyed pushing them beyond their limits. Whether I find them on a mango tree or parking lot, I'll sit and run and say, hey, are you moving forward? Are you publishing? Are you doing this? Okay, don't let family be a stumbling block. Look at family and career and move both together. In that, a baby in one arm, a book in the other arm, and you can do both together. I think that's all I'll say for now, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Professor Harriet. I think that, well, so I think it's wonderful because we're soon going to be moving to speak with some who have been mentees of yours. I think it's tremendous how you've shared the amount of personal energy that you have put into developing women at the institution. And just, you know, one thing maybe that our panel can think about a little bit later on is this balance between the sort of individual one-on-one efforts, making yourself somebody who people feel comfortable coming to with these kinds of issues, because that's the first step. If they don't even talk to you about the issues, then it's harder to mentor them around. So that balance between that individual effort versus putting systems in place to try to make it easier sort of on a larger scale and involve more in the process. So thank you. Let me move on to our next panelist, to Professor Nakanjako. So Professor Nakanjako, you completed your clinical training when Professor Mayanja was head of the Department of Medicine. So I'm wondering if you can share your perspective on how the environment at Makerere had evolved at that time, and then continues to evolve with respect to women leaders in science and health professions. Also, I'd like you to consider, as part of, you know, in the context of your answer, your experience in doing education with the University of Antwerp, the efforts of MUYU, and then also your role as principal of the College of Health Sciences.
Okay, thank you very much, Tracy, for that interesting question. True, I completed my clinical training when Professor Harriet was head of department. She was the first head of department of medicine, the first female head of department of medicine, and subsequently she became the first dean of the School of Medicine. A few years later, Professor Abdiachika, who is also on this panel, became the second female head of department. That was after a spell of 8 years of male heads of department. Then another mentee, myself, I became the second female dean of the School of Medicine, after which I became the first female principal for the College of Health Sciences, where I am now. So I'll say that the landscape is beginning to receive female leaders at the top level of academia at Makerere University in a male-dominated academic research environment. I'll say it's still male-dominated at the top. And as you can imagine, it's not easy because human nature has to deal with this change and accept the female leaders. So this is ongoing, but I'm glad to see that it has started. And of course, there are a few things that we need to deal with, starting from a few basic things like the clinical research building that we sit in, where the Dean of School of Medicine sits. The bathrooms are both female and male. They were actually originally male bathrooms, because this building was built when there was no female academic. So they were basically male bathrooms. So up to this day, we need to see how to modify them and have female bathrooms. So from this time on, this shock was real to me. And following that, I've tried to be looking at the architectural plans to see if there are female bathrooms and male bathrooms. And recently we had to remodel a building to separate both male and female. It's very simple, but when you talk to the male architects we have, they don't take it something that is obvious because they've not had females as part of academia. So those are some of the small basic challenges that we need to deal with as a form of mindset to accept females at this level. But what is amazing is that females are coming up with highly competitive careers. So previously, I thought that if you choose a female, you have to lower the expectations of the careers, but females are coming up with highly competitive careers. So we need to have policies to support them at the top, because we believe the top has been missing 50% of what they have to do because it is to be contributed by the females. So we've been surviving on only 50% that is offered by the males. Yeah, so looking at the second part of your question, considering my experience with the University of Antwerp, I did my PhD at the University of Antwerp, and I did my postdoctoral training in various places at UCSF with the Warner Green's lab and with the Rafik Sekari lab in Florida, then at the Infectious Disease Institute and Uganda Virus Research Institute. So this was an opportunity for me to do these postdoctoral placements. So I think that partnerships with high income countries can help create more opportunities for women to do these PhD and postdoctoral placements. And they provide collaborations, opportunities for collaborative research projects, which provide opportunities for the females to conduct research in Africa and then travel overseas to do experiments that they need to do, which are not done locally. So this gives a sandwich perspective of the training, which is more acceptable to the females since they don't have to spend a total of 4 or 5 years out of country. So they can do part of the research here and do part of the experiments across. And then the partnerships also provide opportunities for technology transfer through, so we need to support technology transfer through equipment grants where we can set up the laboratories in the low-income countries so that we can utilize these trainees when they return home, they're able to do some of the experiments. And this has happened in some ways at Makerere. I'm in the translational immunology group, and we now have equipment to do multicolor flow cytometry of different multicolor panels. We have LSR2, we have even the Aurora flow cytometry, next generation sequencing equipment is here now. So we think that as we get more and more equipment, we'll be able to support female scientists to do work here and do technology transfer from abroad. Partnerships also provide opportunities for co-supervision. Personally, I was supervised by a promoter in University of Antwerp, that is Bob Kolebundas, together with a promoter here who is Moses Kamya. And this gave an opportunity for me to spend some time in Uganda that is supervised and some time in Antwerp that is supervised and mentored to reduce the time I was spending away from my family, which is very important. I'll tell you that the average number of children of the Ugandan women on this call is 4. So having to look after the 4 children and a spouse needs to be part of the scientist's duty. So we need to take care of that. So partnerships can work towards creating an enabling environment for the females to thrive in a family-friendly environment. We think that it may be more costly, it may cost more to cater for these facilities. For example, if a female has to travel and you cater maybe to travel with a baby or to make the situation more family friendly, it may cost more, but we need to look at that and see whether we can have doctoral and postdoctoral packages that are slightly more expensive than the males. I don't think there's a shortcut in this if we are to produce high quality female scientists. So these are some of the things that I have learned from my journey. And of course, not forgetting mentorship. Mentorship at each level, we need to mentor these ladies, but most importantly, we need to put in place policies to support them because these have not been there and it's this time to create them. So over to you, Tracy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think there are a couple of pieces of what you shared that were particularly striking to me. I think, the first piece about something as simple as, do we have bathrooms? I mean, that I think it's so simple, but yet so important. And I think the fact that you are still needing to think about working with the architects for new buildings to try to make sure that we have just even this very basic ability to have women in the same spaces as men is, is striking. And how fortunate the university is to have people like you who are thinking about these things. I think the other piece that was particularly striking to me was the importance of technology transfer and how that can be used to help women scientists to be able to reduce the amount of time that they may needing to be away. I mean, certainly that technology transfer supports those efforts, but really technology transfer supports everybody's efforts, right? Because it increases capacity for high quality work for all Ugandans, regardless of gender. And so I think, this is one piece where, it's critical to supporting women, but everybody benefits. And as you said, everybody benefits when you have a balance of genders who are in leadership. So thank you for sharing that. I think we'll move on to our next panelist for now. So I'd like to pose my next question to Professor Biachika Kibwika. So Pauline, so you also completed clinical training when Professor Mayanja was head of the Department of Medicine, and now you hold that role. So what are some of the strategies that you have found helpful or some of your colleagues have found helpful in navigating the Ugandan academic environment as a woman professional? And another piece of this question, can you describe some key characteristics of the allies who have assisted on that journey and the role models that have helped to support you in your career path? And the last piece, just to put this in context of your current role now with respect to encouraging gender equity in academia and in the Department of Medicine.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Good morning and good afternoon. Good day, everyone. I'll not introduce myself again, as you have already mentioned my names and what I do. It's an honor for me to present at this conference. And as you mentioned rightly, yes, I joined the program Masters of Medicine in Internal Medicine when Professor Mayanja was the head of department. And the question to me is regarding the strategies that I have found helpful and some of the characteristics of the role models that have helped to support me in my career path. So I'll start by giving a brief background about women. I think Professor Mayanja mentioned some of the challenges that women face. And specifically, I'll say that women, especially women in Africa, I think are influenced by the kind of background setting they grow up in. And many of them, somehow that makes them a bit timid and a bit less resilient compared to the men. However, going up the ladder of education, a number of them get to overcome that, although it's still quite a problem amongst some of them. And when they get up there, of course, they get into issues of relationships and childbirth and childcare, pregnancy, childbirth, and childcare. And this has a big toll on their career path, especially the relationships. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. And that has a big influence on the women, especially the women in Africa. I think the women in the more developed world might be a little different. So coming back to me as an individual, what strategies have I used and what are the characteristics of my role models? I remember when I joined the MEd program, Professor Mayanja, as head of department, invited us to a meeting. And in that meeting, she told us she understood that we were women first and foremost, and that we were growing. She asked about our age, each of us mentioned, and she said, yeah, you're growing. You're not growing any younger, you're growing older. And that, of course, had meaning to us regarding our reproductive health. And she said, you know, I understand you have to grow as your families grow, and the babies also have to grow. And that gave me a lot of leeway because previously we knew that getting babies during training was a no-go area. It was almost condemning yourself to failure if you got pregnant or got a baby. So what am I trying to say is that family is very, very important. So if you get a role model who has family at heart and encourages you to go on with family while also going on with your career path, then you should take advantage of that and get yourself up the ladder that way. So she encouraged us, and she's my role model, and until today, I tell my students the same. I got first year MEd students, the ones who are currently in the first year, and I had a meeting with them, and I told them the same. And I told them, you know, I get this from my role model, Professor Mayanja, and I encourage them. So that gives them confidence. But at the same time, I tell them they shouldn't take advantage of it, saying they shouldn't work hard because we have given them this flexibility. They know they have to work hard. So apart from talking about family, I tell the ladies that it's important as a woman to work very hard, because you, at the end of the day, you're still judged on the same scale as the men. So you still have to prove yourself. And going back to the question, my role models, I know Professor Mayanja works very hard. She's a very, very intelligent lady. And that alone makes me admire her. So I always strive to work very hard. I always strive to ensure that I build confidence. And I know that I can only build confidence if I know the subject matter. So if you don't have knowledge, you might have confidence, but it will be false confidence. So the strategy is to get as much knowledge as possible, be confident with the subject matter, at the same time have the confidence in yourself to be able to speak out. Because if you speak out and you're speaking out nonsense or rubbish, at the end of the day, you don't feel good about yourself. So the strategy is to gain knowledge, to read as much as possible, practice as much as possible, so that you are confident with the medical scientific knowledge. And then that also helps you to build your own personal confidence. So regarding role models and regarding my own strategies, so I've talked about building confidence and having knowledge, reading. The other aspect is making sure that you achieve excellence in whatever you do. And of course, achieving this with a lot of enthusiasm. So one time, one of my mentors told me, Professor Kamia told me that, you know what, sometimes you're in meetings and they're asking for somebody to do something and you really have no idea, but take up the role. Then you go do research about it. And in the process you learn, at the same time you deliver on the assignments they have given you. So I took that up and I use it. So if somebody is asking me to do something, even if I have no idea, I'll say, yes, I'll do it. And then I'll go do my research and learn how to do it. So taking on tasks is accepting to take on tasks is another strategy that I have used. And of course, building, working with excellence in whatever I do. I know as women and as a lady, there will always be a lot of criticism, but I have taught myself over time to focus on the positive aspects and ignore the negative aspects, because that kind of pulls you down. So my strategy is to focus on the positive and think positive. I practice a lot of mindfulness. So I keep, you know, a positive attitude, because I know that there's no perfect human being and there's always be something negative about you or something negative said about you. So that's another strategy that I use. Then I'll talk about assertiveness. I know for some ladies, like Professor Nachimuli here, some ladies are naturally assertive. Some ladies are naturally assertive, but I mean, it's important to learn to be assertive as a woman, because we live in a male-dominated world, especially us in Africa. If you don't learn to be assertive many times, then you may not get yourself through the career path. So assertiveness in terms of speaking the truth and doing the right thing with the confidence that it deserves, and the courage to speak out when you're confident about something and you know what you're saying is right, is very, very important. So assertiveness, we need to teach the younger generation of females this strategy of assertiveness. And then one thing I've also learned from my mentors, both Professor Mayanja and Professor Kamia, is tact. I have noticed that when I sit with them in meetings, sometimes I feel like, wow, they should be so direct, say it as it is. but they use a lot of tact to say certain things. They don't put things as plain as they are, because sometimes you say things as they are, especially if you're a woman. The male will say, this woman, what does she think she is? She's undermining us, she's a woman. But you find a way to say things tactfully, and at the end of the day, that helps you to navigate through some of the challenges. Then the other strategy is to build upon emotional intelligence. I think emotional intelligence is very important, and I would tell that to all the ladies, the upcoming leaders, that it is important to practice emotional intelligence, to learn more about emotional intelligence. Professor Nakanjako touched a very, very powerful message of bringing technology to Africa. I know as women, I'll give my own experience during my PhD time. I was doing a PhD in clinical pharmacology, and Professor Mayanja knows that very well. There was very little capacity for clinical pharmacology research in the country. And many of my experiments flopped, and I did not have lots of clinical pharmacologists to consult. So I had to carry my samples to Mahido in Thailand to be able to complete the experiments, to complete the PhD. But then before I did that, I thought about the family. Living a family. At that time, I had 3 children with a husband, and I had to go to Mahido for over 2 months. It was such a difficult decision. So bringing technology back home is very important, because it's very difficult for women to take on such a decision to go for 2 months when you have small babies in the house. If you don't have support from your husband, it's very difficult for you. And over time, I've noticed that a number of ladies, even when we talk about fellowship training, they're reluctant to do it because they know they have children, they have a husband. So it is very, very difficult. So I think that's all I have to say, but maybe going forward, it's important for us to mentor the younger generation, the women in particular, emphasizing some of these things that I have said, and also emphasizing to them that being a woman will not necessarily put them at an advantage, but they still have to prove that they are they are excellent in what they are doing, they are knowledgeable, and they are capable of doing whatever they need to do to be able to climb the ladders. So they need to learn that, and it's very important for us to emphasize that. It's also important to boost self-esteem. I'm currently dealing with a young lady whose self-esteem is really, really damaged because of marital issues. And this also affects her output in class, it affects her self-esteem, it affects the way she relates with other people, it affects her output in class, her academic performance, simply because she feels rejected, she feels, it's not a good position to be in. So it's important for us to teach the young ladies that, about their self-esteem and how to overcome some of these challenges and not to feel rejected, because that ends up making them neglect their own careers and thinking they are almost useless in society because of a broken relationship, So I think I will stop there for now so that I can give opportunity to somebody else to speak. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you so much. And, just listening to sort of this list of strategies, honestly, it just is making me feel you're talking about supporting someone to be a whole person and to think about balancing, not just sort of having career and having family, but that these are all part of one person who is the same person, that not as if everything has to be separate. And then, some of these skills, actually see that there was a question from the audience that I might just throw back to you for a brief answer. Question about where young women can read about and learn about how to develop some of these things like tact, verbal negotiation skills. Are there any resources that you might share with the audience just briefly before we move on to our last panelist?
Yes, there are plenty of books on leadership, and many of these books on leadership talk about many of these skills. So I wouldn't want to pinpoint on any one book, but I'll just recommend that they look for the books on leadership skills and how to build your leadership and confidence and all this will be spoken about. But as a woman, I also want to tell them that because as a woman, it's very, very important that family is important to majority of women. So building and getting this support from the word go from your spouse is very important. Tracy, I think you remember one time I traveled with the whole family with my husband and children. Probably I was trying to look for support from my husband to let me do what I have to do. So some of those things are things that we have to do. If you have to travel a lot and your husband says, no, you can't leave the children, maybe you need to plan and save some money, and the next trip you have to go with them. Although you're on an academic trip, they will understand that, mommy travels, but she travels for academic responsibilities and not just for fun. And in a way, you're also mentoring them. If you have daughters, in a way, you're mentoring them to take this on to their future. So those are some of the things you have to do. But regarding leadership, there are plenty of books out there on leadership.
Great, thank you. And I think to that last point also, Professor Nakanjako had mentioned that, some of the responsibility may be on the academic institutions to provide financial support to help people travel with their families as a way to encourage more women to take these travel opportunities. Okay, so
before that skips away, I need to add that ladies can read some of the books, like Steve Covey books. Steve Covey has a lot of books that support personal effectiveness, habits of highly effective people, the 8 habits, and so many of them. Steve Covey, Malcolm Gladwell, Maxwell. Those are some of the books that they can read. Even Napoleon Hill. Those books help to tell people about personal development, personal effectiveness, and grit, which we need as ladies. Thanks.
Thank you so much for those recommendations. Okay, so last but most certainly not least, I want to ask my last question to Professor Nachimuly. So Annette, you completed your clinical training around the same time as Professor Nakanjako and Beatrica Kibuika. However, you were in the field of obstetrics and gynecology, where the patients are female, but many or the majority of the faculty are male. So I'm wondering if your experience with navigating the academic hierarchy was different from that of your colleagues in internal medicine, and if so, how? And then also thinking about your current role as Dean of the School of Medicine, I'm wondering what challenges, but also potential solutions you see with respect to promoting gender equity in academia.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And it's my great pleasure to be part of this panel. Thank you for organizing it. I hope I can be heard. Well, I think today we can say is the Mayanja Girls' Day. I trained as an obs-gyn at the time when Professor Mayanja was the head of internal medicine. I hope she forgave me for not coming there, but I instead went to obstetrics and gynecology, because at that time there was another great lady who was heading the department, Professor Florence Mirembe, and she was the first female head of department. Now I had to choose between the 3, pediatrics, medicine, and obs-gyn. But Professor Mirembe, I think, was a bit more aggressive at that time. She was desperate for females to get into the department of obstetrics and gynecology because there were really very few at the time. So she started talking to us early as undergraduates. In fact, I think really Damali and Pauline were also supposed to have joined, but they kind of crossed to the other side, which is all right because we still work together.
So Harriet was more aggressive.
Florence was more aggressive, but I must say, I think it was a great time to train as residents at that time. It was like a new era when females were at the helm of most of these big departments, because it was really, for obs-gyn, for example, the training had been so harsh to everybody, but of course women most hit, to the point that very few were getting into the training program, and again, very few really completing. And sometimes they would take they would drop out after spending so many years. Out of the 3-year program, they could have been there 5 years and then leave with nothing. But when looking back, you'd see that some of the things which made many of those drop out were things that could have been handled, because they were majorly things that are to do with them as being women, mothers, wives, spouses who are not able to understand why they are always in hospital day and night. And yet, if you missed even one night duty, you could end up having a whole year of retraining. So when we went in, it was really a time when we were seeing a lot of hope. We were so encouraged as women because we had people who really understood us at the helm of this department. So my training in a way was similar. I mean, the experience I had was similar to what Pauline and Damali went through, but of course, there were those special challenges. Being in a women's health arena, people felt like women need to get more and more involved. So I think there was more and more acceptance that women have to join the teacher training program. And this was across the board from both the males and female colleagues. I remember when we joined, we were 12 and 3 of us were females. And everyone said, oh, there are very many female residents this time around. Well, 3 out of 12. And it was the biggest residency group to enter at any one time, because the previous years would have 1 or 2 residents in one cohort. So we trained, and so what really made me enjoy the experience despite the harsh environment, because the environment remained harsh really, but things were just made better a bit by then Professor Mirembe. It was those small things. You had someone you go to and talk to understand your circumstances. I mean, my child is sick. I had a 2-year-old son when I started, had just got married. So she would understand and give you tips on how to do it. And to me, those things impacted me. Then when you would share notes with internal medicine colleagues, you'd know that, yeah, Professor Manja is there. Even if you're not from her department, you'd go and share with her some of these cross-cutting issues, and they would really advise. And I think, to me, we found the ground already set when we became heads of department. A lot had been done to try and level this ground for us female leaders to take on. I think I've told Professor Manja, I tell Professor Florence Mirembe often that our life was made much easier by you who went before us, because I didn't have to make our second female head of department. So I didn't have to be there trying to navigate that. Professor Mirembe had done it. And also it was not, I mean, I came in as head about 8 years after her term. So it was not like people had forgotten. She had established systems that support women that only needed to be built on. One of the challenges I know that made the training very harsh is it was almost taboo to conceive while on the residency program. Actually, it was one sure way you would stay on longer. So as head of department, my major interests were really in supporting. First of all, to make it not a taboo to conceive while on the residency program, but of course not encouraging it, but we know those of us in gynecology that actually sometimes you can postpone this, and by the time you want to have the children, they can't come. So, and that's all the argument I used to put across when we have meetings and we have to discuss the student who is struggling because she had children. I'm like, you know very well we are the ones who deal with the fertility and the infertility of women. We tell them to postpone, and sometimes they postpone and never have the children. So it is never the wrong time, but let's help them through this. So part of the tips I always used were, first of all, learning from the past. I never had a baby during my residency program, but I always told people this is not the end of the world. So it was to encourage female residents that once they think they have any issue, whether reproductive health concern or what, the head of department was always there to listen. I mean, once you understand it, I almost became like their legal representation, and also encouraging other female colleagues in the department that it's our duty as a women's health department to show that we really promote women's health at its best. If you can't care for your own, you can't claim to to care for others. So, for example, when people conceive, then we give them some special work arrangements. They go for some time. Then when they return, we give them slots that they can easily keep in the system as because they need skills, but be able to go back and look after their new babies and their other children. So that is a culture almost now established. I'm sure it would take a long time if someone ever wanted to reverse it, because now it's like people can't even imagine what it was before the last 10, 15 years when it was difficult to have a baby while on the residency program. The other one is even undergraduate students. We speak to them and then we let them know if they have issues, they can open up to one of us and then we can support them. So, but one of the tips I have known that as a woman leader, it's not just enough to be there, you have to be excellent at what you do, because the males, the female colleagues will only respect you if you're excellent at what you do. So it is never an option to be average in what you do. I always try to make sure that I know whatever I have to know in order to lead. Well, I know we may not be good on time, but fast forward now as dean, well, my tenure as dean has been like 8 months. It's mainly trying to learn the challenges, but I know very well that both at undergraduate and in many of our residency programs, we still have very low enrollment numbers for females. So we're always trying to encourage females to get in, because when they're out, they can never really understand the dynamics. So we're happy that the enrollment numbers are increasing, but we still need a lot of, I think, role modeling, mentoring, so that we have these coming, and then they'll be the pool of the next leaders. Otherwise, having very few of them within the pool, then that means in future we risk having very few women in academic leadership. So just to wind up by saying that really it's great that we had people who smoothed this path for us. And I think it's our duty to really make it even smoother for those who are coming after us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nachimuli. I know we are short on time, so I just have to say thank you to all of our panelists today. I think, I know I am fortunate to have all of you as role models and to have learned, some from your perspectives today. I know the audience is as well, and how fortunate the university is, Makerere University, is to have all of you engaged in trying to pave the way for women who are coming up. I do need to thank everyone for attending and participating in our panel. And at this time, we're going to have a short break. So if you haven't, if you haven't already, please make sure to fill out the survey for this panel. And the link to the survey is in the chat box. So we'll reconvene again in a few minutes for the beginning of the next panel session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.